you.
Okay, thanks, Liz. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for hopping on with us, and happy June to you. It's hard to believe we're almost halfway through the year already, but hopefully you're enjoying some nice spring/summer weather wherever you are, and appreciate you spending a little bit of time with us here today. As Liz talked about, we're going to touch on expiration dates, which is obviously a really crucial component to every fire and EMS agency. Obviously, if you don't have any funding, then it's hard to do what you guys do. And, there's a lot of different components that get budgeted for or forecasted for. Typically, the labor part of the operations takes about 90% of the budget, but we're going to spend our time today talking about that other 10%. So the other logistical items, your equipment, your assets, your consumable supplies, your vehicles, your medical supplies, things like that, all those different items that kind of expire. How do you plan for those and have better visibility into when they're expiring, and as you're forecasting out into the future, just being better prepared for what you need to budget for as a department. So with that, we always kick these off with a few poll questions just to get a better gauge of who's joining us today. So if you don't mind just taking a few seconds here and filling this out. If you're a PSTrax customer or not, how you're tracking your expiration dates today, how far in advance are you preparing your budgets and forecasts? And if you scroll down a little bit more, there's a couple others. In terms of your high dollar equipment, so all of your assets, things like SCBA, PPE, tick cameras, hose, all that kind of stuff, how much in value are you tracking? And then for consumable supplies, so things that you kind of move through more quickly, how much of those are you finding that you waste each year just from things expiring? So we'll give that maybe 5 more seconds here. All right, so we'll go. There we go. Thanks, Liz, for closing that. That's perfect. So it looks like a lot of PSTrax clients on the call today, which is great. Some tracking things digitally, I imagine on the PSTrax system, some using paper currently. How far in advance are you preparing your budget? So a good mix here. 1 year, 2 year, and 5 years were the most popular answers. In terms of high dollar equipment, looks like about 33% were under 250,000, and the other 67% were 500,000 to 1 million. So quite a bit of different assets and equipment. And then finally, for consumable supplies, how much do you find you're being wasted each year? 33% were between 10,000 to 25,000. And the other 67% were no idea, which I'm not surprised by. That's kind of a tricky one to track. And we'll talk a little bit about that today because we have a few reports that could potentially help you with that. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive in. Just a few slides here, and then we'll hop into the system, and I'll show you from a PSTrax standpoint how we can help track some of these things. When we are talking with different departments, whether you're using PSTrax already or not, there could still be some portion of your operations that are maybe being done manually on paper or spreadsheets. And when it comes to expiration dates, budgeting, forecasts, these are some of the challenges that we typically hear. And usually these type of items tend to fall either on the officers or the command staff, right? They're the ones that are usually in charge of safety concerns, which is obviously a big part of expiration dates. We want to make sure our equipment is not expired so that we're in compliance and that all of our personnel are safe. Also from a lawsuit or compliance perspective, things like narcotics, EMS medications, we need to make sure that those aren't expired because we don't want to be administering those to patients. And then obviously just from a budgeting and forecasting perspective, if you are doing any of this on paper or spreadsheets today, that becomes challenging if you have a lot of different spreadsheets kind of tracking these different items. Sometimes those spreadsheets don't get updated as frequently as they should. So you have data that's maybe inaccurate or not as timely as you need it to be. So we'll touch on some of those today. But again, those are some of the challenges that we typically hear when it comes to expiration dates and planning for those items. All right, and as I alluded to before, there's a lot of different equipment. So we'll try to touch on a lot of these different things today, and I'll try not to bounce around too much as we do that. When it comes to the expiration dates, some of the expiration dates, as you know, are already kind of predetermined. So NFPA is kind of the main one for fire departments that has a lot of predetermined expiration dates. Things like PPE, obviously the expiration date on those is 10 years as defined by the 1851 guidelines of NFPA. For SCBA, NFPA has that at 15 years. But then there's a lot of other assets, right? Your vehicles, you name it, electronics, radios, hose, hydrants, stretchers, whatever it might be, tick cameras, jaws of life, all those different things that maybe don't have a set expiration date, but they kind of wear down over time, right? So you still have to plan to replace them over some duration of time, kind of the lifespan of that particular asset. And then on top of those hard kind of, high dollar assets, there's also consumable supplies that you're probably tracking either for EMS supplies or even just station supplies, right? The different items that the crew members are using throughout their shifts. So when we talk about consumable supplies, a lot of times agencies will have a central location where they're tracking these items, and whether it's a warehouse or a big supply room, something like that. And usually you have the most visibility at that warehouse, right? If you're the administrator of those supplies, typically at the warehouse, you have a pretty good idea of what you have on hand and the expiration dates of those supplies in the warehouse. But as we know, what typically happens is those supplies get transferred out to supply rooms, sometimes all the way out to vehicles or med bags. And once those supplies are out in the field, it becomes harder to have accurate visibility of what's expiring and where those different items are. So we'll talk about specifically with our inventory module, how we help track that. And with expiration dates with consumable supplies, going back to one of the poll questions, we typically see a lot of wastage within departments where things expire a lot of times without departments even knowing it, right? Because they don't even have the visibility. But those things will expire and basically get thrown in the trash, right? And get replaced with other items. So what we want to try to help with is, looking at kind of the whole span of your agency across all the different locations that you're tracking these supplies and showing you where they are and when they are expiring. So if you do have items that might be expiring and they're located at maybe a less busy station, you can do some operational efficiencies, such as moving those items over to a busier station so that they don't expire and you can use them up before they expire. So there's little tricks, if you will, that you can kind of put in place once you have better visibility of what's out in the field. Another really important, and I might argue the most important kind of category of expiration dates is when it comes to medications and narcotics, especially if you're an ALS department and you're carrying controlled substances. This is obviously a huge area of just monitoring, right, and concern when it comes to expiration dates. And not only from a compliance perspective, but a safety perspective, the actual patient safety. We got to make sure we don't have any expired drugs or medications when we're administering those. So again, we'll talk about this in our inventory module and our controlled substance module. We help track those different items so you have visibility of what's expiring. And again, if something is expiring, you can either waste it or you can move it to another location before it expires to hopefully use it and not have that wastage. All right, and I put this together. I was kind of reading through some different articles on best practices for budgeting and forecasting, and I tried to consolidate some of those different resources, and these were my top 7 that I kind of came up with. So I wanted to share them with you all. So number 1, in terms of budgeting, a good best practice is to know your budgeting process, and I would say know it really, really, really well if you can. Obviously every agency is different. So you have your different funding sources where your money is actually coming from. Every agency typically has a fiscal year. So if you have a January fiscal year, typically you start planning about 6 months ahead of time, getting your budgets in place so that you can then get the appropriate approvals from the city or the council or whoever it might be for your upcoming budget. So what we found is the better you know your own budgeting process, the easier it is obviously to kind of plan for that and to be prepared for what you need to have in place as you kind of prepare those documents and whatnot. The second one is confirming the items you're responsible for. And this kind of sounds pretty simple and straightforward, but a lot of times there are kind of blurry lines between different divisions in your agency, and even within the divisions, the people that oversee the items, sometimes there can be gray areas of who's actually in charge of what, right? So just kind of getting clarification and maybe even documenting, right? Who's in charge of what items and what assets and what equipment, so that when budgeting and forecasting does come about, everyone knows what they're responsible for and nothing falls through the cracks. That's the big thing, is you don't want to have things that you forget about, and then once you're in the middle of a budget cycle, you realize all of our helmets are expired, right? Or all of our jackets or whatever it might be, and you have to go back to the city council or back to your kind of governing entity to get additional funds approved. So that's what we want to try to avoid. And so the more, I guess, clear you can make those divisions of responsibility, the better. The third one, and the one we'll kind of talk about today with PSTrax, is trying to centralize all of your data into one system. And if you do have a lot of different spreadsheets or forms that you're using to track expiration dates, hopefully eliminating those so that you don't have a lot of different sources of truth, if you will. So by centralizing all your data into one place, it just makes it easier for reporting. You know where to go to get all the information. It can make it more updated and more timely by getting crew input on expiration dates. So if they have something that's expired, they can notify you of it. So that's a big benefit of consolidating all those things into one place. The fourth one is analyzing your existing data. So once you have all of your data in one place, once a year or more frequently, sometimes you can actually export all that data with your expiration dates and analyze it and look for trends, look for surprises, things that are coming up for expiration that maybe you didn't plan for or didn't expect. And then by doing that analysis, you can typically find some improvement opportunities, right? Some things that maybe you could do a little bit differently or a little bit better to help predict and just kind of improve your operations overall. The fifth best practice is planning strategically. And what I mean by that is budgeting. Let's start with it. Budgeting isn't the most fun exercise, and I'm sure probably most of you didn't get into the fire or EMS service to prepare budgets, and because of that, and because you guys have a lot of other things on your plate, sometimes the budgeting kind of falls to the last minute, and we realize, oh, it's time for the budgets, we got to get that together, and we kind of come up with a 1-year budget for next year, but we don't really put any forethought into the future beyond that first year. So what we recommend, and a good best practice, is to create budgets not just for next year, but go out 3 years, go out 5 years, And the reason for that is you can begin to share your vision, right, for your department or your division of the agency in terms of what equipment are we going to be getting out in 3 years and 5 years. So you can start to plan for that and get early buy-in from all the other stakeholders that have to sign off on that decision. So the earlier you can kind of, share that information, share your vision for where you want to head. Let's say, maybe you want to, in 3 years, you want to upgrade your jackets, right? From maybe a lower version up to a higher quality product for all of your crew members. That's a big project, and it's going to require probably a bigger budget than what you typically have or currently have. So just getting those ideas out there with the appropriate stakeholders, starting to plan for it is really helpful. The sixth best practice is think about any aha scenarios or what if scenarios. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of different things that impact our budgets and our forecasts. Some of them are in our control and some of them aren't. Things like inflation obviously aren't really in our control. Things are just naturally going to be more expensive over time. So just planning for that. But like I just mentioned, if you have other goals for your agency, like if you want to upgrade a certain piece of equipment compared to what you currently have over a certain period of time, all those types of things you can build into your budget forecasting and kind of plan for those. Another big one is regulations, right? Sometimes the regulations force us to have to do certain things. As an example, I know this isn't really an expiration date example, but like on PPE gear, the newer requirement to do advanced cleanings at least once a year, I'm sorry, or at least twice a year, or after every big incident. So those type of things, when they do change, they impact our budgets. And sometimes if like NFPA or a regulating entity changes the amount of time an item can actually be used, so the lifetime of an item, that will impact our budgeting and our planning of when we have to replace that. And then finally, the seventh best practice is just adding a contingency. And I think probably if you're already preparing your budgets, this is a little bit of a no-brainer and hopefully something you're already doing, but always plan for the unknown. And if you can, try to build in a contingency into your budget. We've seen some agencies go up to a 25% contingency, and not always, not all the time will that get approved. But even if you could get some of your contingency, that's always helpful. So you have a little bit of wiggle room if you need it. And then I just put a little tip here. If you aren't already, I definitely recommend looking at alternative funding resources too. Most fire and EMS agencies have pretty tight budgets unless you're in a really fortunate part of the country where maybe you have a little more leeway on that. But there are a lot of good alternative funding resources like grants and even fundraising entities that can help you hopefully expand your budget and the funds that are available. Okay, I'm just going to cruise through these slides because today we have a lot of folks that are currently using PSTrax. But if you aren't already familiar with us, we have 7 different modules, and the modules are a la carte, so you can pick and choose what you'd like to use. But from an expiration date perspective today, when I hop into the system, I'll kind of touch on these different areas, and I'll try not to bounce around too much, but all of these have a component of expiration dates to them. So we'll kind of review some of the different reports and just data that PSTrax can capture so you can plan for that a little bit better. And this is what the system looks like. So we basically consolidate those different modules into one place. It's all custom configured. And the big thing as it relates to expirations and budgeting is all of your data is in one place. So as I talked about a little bit before, if you are still doing things on spreadsheets or forms, those will go away, and all that data will be in the system, and you can export it or report on it anytime that you need to. one thing that makes PSTrax unique is we actually build the system for you. So typically with a lot of other software companies, and you might have experienced this, they'll usually give you the software, but then it's kind of up to you and your agency to learn it, to set it up, to import your data, configure it, test it, and then roll it out to the crews. And that's a big project. A lot of times it takes several months. Sometimes it never gets completed. You may have experienced that. I know we have as a company. We've bought software and just didn't have the time to roll it out, so it kind of sits on the shelf, and my term for that is shelfware. With PSTrax, we do things a little bit differently. So all you have to do is email us your documentation. Typically with assets and equipment and inventories, you probably already have that on a spreadsheet of some sorts or a form. So all you have to do is just email us your documentation that you currently have. And then our implementation team will set up your system. We import all that data for you, and we'll configure your system, test it, train your admins, and then help you roll it out. And on average, that takes about 4 to 6 weeks. So it's a pretty quick process if you haven't worked with us before. We guarantee that as well. Now, after the initial implementation, as you know, there's all these different operational changes that happen. You might get new jackets or new equipment. You might get new vehicles. You might have an academy that graduates, so you have people that are being added into the organization. And with a lot of other software systems, typically there's an additional fee to have the company help you with those types of things. With PSTrax, all those operational changes are included, and there's no additional fee for that. So you always have two options with us. You can make these changes yourself. If you want to go into the system, you have all the abilities to go in and make these changes and make updates whenever you'd like to. But if you don't want to deal with it, you can always call us up, and our team will be available to help you. And usually it's about a day or so to make those type of changes. All right, and just to kind of finish off here, a little bit about PSTrax. We were founded in 2009. We're privately owned, and we're based out of Littleton, Colorado. We work with about 700 agencies now across the US, Canada, and Australia. And we have a 98.5% renewal rate, which is something we're really proud of. And I think that speaks to the system itself, but also the customer service that I talked a little bit about. Okay, so we'll come back to this in a little bit and talk about some of our upcoming events. But Liz, I'll check in with you, and I'll go ahead and start getting logged into our site here. But any questions so far that I can help with as it pertains to the slides I just went through?
All right, and so far it's all quiet out there. We don't have any questions at this point, but I'm betting we're going to start getting into some.
Okay, yeah, that's perfect. Thanks. Great. Well, I'll go ahead and hop into the system. And again, if this is your first time seeing PSTrax, it is a cloud-based system. So you can use any browser to log in. You can also use any device that you have. So I'm using a computer today, but you can use iPads, Toughbooks, smartphones, whatever devices your agency has. And when the crew member logs in, this is kind of what they see. So this is their dashboard for their station. They'll see all the scheduled checks here. And basically a number represents that something's due. So their job during the day is to try to get those numbers down to 0. You also see any open alerts here in the middle of the dashboard. And then the journal is a digital whiteboard. So any communications you'd like to post for the crews, you can just put those right there. All right, and I'm actually gonna start off by going into some of the administrator functions, since typically expiration dates, will fall under kind of that person, a certain person or a certain division within your organization. So for things like PPE, SCBA, assets, within the system, we have these asset lists or gear lists for each one. So I'm just going to show you, we'll go into PPE, but just know that this applies for SCBA and assets as well. So all of your high dollar equipment that you're tracking. And what we do is we load in all these items for you, including the expiration dates. So for every PPE item, for every SCBA item, all your high dollar assets, you can come into these gear lists and sort by expiration date and see all the items that are currently expired. So for PPE, I can see I have 6 items that are expired. That's why they're in red right now. And anything that was about to expire would be in orange over here in the column. So what we do is we want to make sure you as the administrator have really quick and easy visibility to those expiration dates. So at any point, if you need to go in and pull up a certain item, and we'll just search for part of a serial number here, you can pull up an item and see the expiration date or see if it's expired. And same thing goes for the other modules that I mentioned. So SCBA, we load in all of your SCBA items, and then you can track those expiration dates. And we can see in this case, I have one that's expiring, and the orange highlighted ones mean they're going to be expiring within 6 months. So I have 2 there that are coming up for expiration. And finally, for assets, same deal here. So all of your different types of assets, and these are just some examples of different things you can track, but literally any category of high dollar equipment that you want to track, we can build that in for you here. Things like, hydrants, hose, tick cameras, drones, even if you want to get into your actual buildings like roofs and things like that, electronics, we can build all that in to the system for you. And then just like before, you'll have the expiration date column that'll show you all the expired items and things coming up for expiration. So for these high dollar asset modules, we also have expiration date reports. So when you're doing your budgeting and your planning, instead of coming here to this page and just kind of looking at the column, we actually have a standard report that you can pull up. And the nice thing about this is you can go as far out into the future as you want. So if I just want to see everything that's expiring by today, I can just leave today's date and it'll show me everything that's currently expired. So that can be helpful, for compliance reasons, if you want to just see or make sure that you don't have anything expired that is being actively used out in the field. And if we do have something that's expired, we can retire it. So when we retire an item, it'll basically be archived in the system. So we will maintain all the history and the documentation for it, but it won't be actively used anymore. If we're doing a budget for, let's say, maybe a 1-year budget, you can just go out a year and select your date, and then it'll show you everything that's currently expired, but also everything else that will be expired by that date you selected. So again, this is helpful if we're doing a 1-year planning or 1-year budget report. And again, like I mentioned in the slide deck, it is helpful if you want to be a little more prepared and kind of get folks, give folks a little bit of insight into your vision for your department. You can go out further. So maybe you want to also share a 3-year report and pull up all the items that will be expiring within 3 years, so you can kind of build those into your 3-year budget. This is also helpful. A lot of agencies will do phased in purchases. So if we have all of our helmets expiring in 3 years, we may decide that instead of replacing everything in 3 years, maybe we want to do a phased approach and start replacing them year by year, so that our costs are a little more staggered and we don't have a big expenditure in 3 years. And again, that same report is available for SCBA, for your SCBA equipment, and also for your high dollar assets. All right, so Liz, I think I see one question, so I'll pause there really quick.
Sure, yeah. So we've got, is there a module that you could use for uniforms that is similar to how PPE would work?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Good question. We are actually, so our inventory module is probably the closest one for consumable supplies. That's what folks will use to track, how many, shirts and pants and whatnot that we have. And we're actually planning to enhance that so that you can actually assign those consumable items out to individuals, similar to the PPE module. So that will be a few months out before we have that functionality, but I'd say that would be the best module to track those type of uniforms and things like that.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Liz. Anything else for now?
No, we're good.
Okay, sounds good. And speaking of consumables, I guess I'll go ahead and hop into that. That's a good segue. So we can hop into the inventory module. And what's nice about the inventory module is it basically gives administrators visibility to your whole department. So if I wanted to, let's say, pull up a certain location like my, let's go to my, I'll do my central supply. I just can't remember where it is. Sorry, guys. Trying to remember where I put it. Well, I can't find it. Sorry about that. We have a central supply somewhere. I just can't remember what location we stored it at. So we'll just go to station one and we'll pull up the station one checks. So as an example, if you have a supply room at a station, or even if you want to go down to the med bags on the vehicles, you can use the inventory module, and this will show you all of your consumable items that you're carrying at that location, as well as the quantity on hand, the lot numbers, and the expiration dates. So talking about forecasting and budgeting with expiration dates, what's nice for consumable supplies is I can plan and see when those things are expiring. And as I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, sometimes these items might be at a slower station and I can actually move them or transfer them to a busier station so they get used up before they expire. So by having this type of visibility, it allows you to do some of those operational, make some of those operational changes and efficiencies if you'd like to. Another good example of this is if there's an item that's maybe in high demand. So let's pull up like EpiPens as an example. Let's say there's kind of a shortage on EpiPens, and we want to know across our department all the EpiPens we have and where they're located. We can pull that up and see exactly where those items are currently at. And for each one, we can see all the expiration dates. And if anything's expired, it'll be in red. If it's about to expire, it'll be in orange. And the nice thing about this module is, as you know, a lot of times there are different lot numbers and different expiration dates for each of those lot numbers. So you can actually see all the different variations of the items that you have, where they're at, and if anything is expired, we want to make sure we remove that so those items don't get accidentally administered. Another cool report as it relates to kind of budgeting and forecasting in the inventory module is the trend report. This is actually a newer report that we released a few months ago, but what you can do with this is, again, select your location that you want to look at. I'll just go back to station one checks. And then you can go as far back as you want. I'll just go back to the start of the year. And what this trend report does is it'll load here in a second, but you can see it'll break it out month by month and show you all the items that were used by month. And then it'll give you an average across the months as well. And then show you the total that you've used over the duration of that time period. So when you're preparing your budget or your forecast for next year, this is a really handy report for consumable supplies, just to kind of estimate how much you'll need of each item. And as we know, sometimes there's ups and downs in terms of kind of cycles that, during certain parts of the year, some items will be used more frequently than others. So you can also use this to plan for those cycles and kind of see when items are maybe being used more frequently than when they are being used less frequently. And if there's any items that were expired that we basically had to throw away because of wastage, where we didn't get to use them before they expired, this will also capture that. So, again, operationally, it's nice to be able to say or see at the end of the year that, we lost basically this amount of supplies because we weren't able to use it on time. And that might affect when you're purchasing things, or how you're allocating different items out to the stations. Similarly, on the controlled substance side, we have a vial list page, and try not to be too repetitive here, but this is kind of a similar view to the equipment gear list pages that I showed before. So essentially, this shows you every vial that's out in the field right now. So if you are carrying controlled substances, this is a really handy module to use. But you can see, again, the expiration dates for every vial, where it's currently located. So if something does expire, you can go to the specific location where it's being carried and remove that. And we can see here we have quite a few expired vials, and then some that are coming up for expiration in our different drug boxes. Liz, I'll pause for a second, see if there's any other questions at this point.
Thanks, Ryan. What is the easiest way to track expiring items if those items are being used daily?
If they're being used daily, yeah, if I understand correctly, and I imagine that's probably related to more of the consumable supplies. What the crew members will do is basically when they go through and do like an inventory check. I'll just show you one real quick here. And let's just pretend they're doing their supply closet. When they do an inventory check, and let's just grab an item like EpiPens, for example. It's actually going to show them the lot number and expiration date for the different items they have. So if something's being used daily and it's expired, this would actually be in red for them to see. So they would actually be able to expire that item and remove it from their stock. And once they do that, that'll automatically update their quantity on hand. You can see here, it basically removes these items. And as an administrator, it'll notify you as well that they're, in this case, they're below min par and they need to be restocked with that particular item. So I hope that answered that. If it didn't, I apologize. And maybe feel free to just write Liz back in the chat and I can try to clarify on that a little bit more. But from a crew perspective, that's kind of what they see. And it's really important, right? We want to make sure not only the administrators have visibility to the expiration dates, but the crew members at the stations do as well. Same thing with PPE gear. When a crew member logs in and they go into their PPE items here, if they have anything that's expired, it'll highlight that in red for them. So we want to try to give as many visual reminders as possible, so we hopefully can replace that expired item with something that's not expired, so that we're in compliance with that.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Liz. So I talked a lot about expiration dates and kind of the different reports. As you can see, the standard reports are kind of across the board. All of our different modules have the the expiration date report that you can pull and get that information from. Another thing though that's helpful to kind of have visibility to when you're doing your budgeting and forecasting are the things that are always broken, right? Things that maybe they don't have a set expiration date, but they're things that are costing us a lot to maintain and to keep in service. So I wanted to share just a few examples of that. On the vehicle side, we have a report called the out of service report. And this will actually kind of tally up the total time that a vehicle was out of service. So let's say we want to go back to the beginning of this year for engine one, we can see here's all the time that engine one has been out of service. And so as part of your budget, if you're trying to justify the replacement of a vehicle or a higher dollar item like that, this is a really handy report that you can use to, basically show as proof that yes, engine one has been out of service for, 30% of the time this year, and it does make sense for us to replace it. So that's a pretty neat one. And then on the equipment modules, we have different cost reports, and I really recommend these if you aren't using them currently. Basically, the cost reports will show you all of the, I call them the lemons, all the lemons in your department that are the ones that tend to be, the items that are broken or out for repair the most. And when you come in here, you can just sort by the maintenance cost column. And this will show you all the items that have a really high repair cost. So like for these jackets, up here at the top, looks like they're all jackets, a lot of them. There's some pants down here, but for these jackets, maybe it's time to just replace those, right? Because it's taking a lot to keep those jackets in service for whatever reason. It probably just time to get a new jacket and get rid of those. So all those types of things, when you're putting your budgets and forecasts together, this is helpful information to include as well. Same thing with assets. We have a cost report for that. So items like maybe let's go to hose. That'd be a good one. If you have certain sticks of hose that are costing a lot to maintain or repair, you can see those items. And this is a good example here. One of them's expired, so it needs to be replaced anyways. But these other two, they don't expire till 2026 or 2029, but we may still decide to replace them just because the maintenance cost is so high. And if you ever want to see the details of that breakdown for the maintenance cost, you can just click right here on the total costs, and that'll show you a line item report of all those different repairs and different different cost items that make up that total. All right, Liz. Well, I think from a high level, that was kind of everything I wanted to cover in terms of expiration date reporting and cost reporting within the system. I'll check in with you one more time, see if there's any questions before we kind of hop back to the upcoming events.
Sounds good. I've got two. First one is the crew uses an item on a call. It has an expiration date. Does the crew have to come back and document that and then update the expiration date of the replacement?
Oh, okay. Great. So yeah, thanks. That sounds like a follow-up to the last question. So thanks for that clarification. So yeah, on the inventory check, in the inventory module, similar to our controlled substance module, if you're familiar with that, we have a usage event. So the crew members, and this is optional, right? Some agencies have their crew members perform a usage event, like when they go on a call to document what inventory items they used. Others don't. So you don't have to do this if you don't want to, but if you would like to document the inventory items that were used on a call, you can select a usage event and then just select what location that came from. So let's say Medic 1 ran a call. So we're going to log a usage event for it. And then the crew members, all they have to do is just select the items that they used. So let's say we used EpiPens, and then I'll just grab like gowns as well. On the next page, this is where they can log what they used. So for gowns is an example of a basic item where we're just capturing quantity. So they can just say, you know, we used 2 gowns. For EpiPens, this is where they'll see a breakdown of the expiration dates and the lot numbers. So whatever items they used, let's say they grabbed, you know, 2 EpiPens with this lot number, or maybe just 1, you know, that'd be more typical. So we'll just say 1 EpiPen. So they used 1 EpiPen. If you want to log the incident number and then add some notes about that usage event, you can do that. But you can see as soon as we select 1, it updates our quantity down to 3. So as soon as we log this, it's going to deduct that 1 EpiPen and these 2 gowns from Medic One's quantities. And then we're just going to have 7 total remaining EpiPens and 2 remaining gowns. So we can see that, and I'll show you in our inventory list. If I go into Medic One here, and we look at gowns, we'll see that we have 2 remaining gowns. And for EpiPens, right up here above, we have 7 EpiPens. And so this is kind of what an admin would have visibility to, right? So as soon as we had 8 before, and as soon as we used 1 EpiPen, it goes down to 7. So the administrators can see that's what we have left. And if I need a breakdown of the different lot numbers and expiration dates that are left, we can see that as well. And you can do that on med bags. You can do that in supply closets. Obviously, your central supply, you would keep track, of all your quantities and whatnot at central supply as well. So yeah, I hopefully that answered that. But thanks for that clarification.
Thank you, Ryan. And then the only other question I have is, can you show kind of a day in the life of who would be ordering new items? So like if you're budgeting and you're looking at the reports, what do those actual reports look like? And how could you go about possibly getting them to the right party for ordering? I know a lot of departments use like a city admin or other assistants. So can you go through what that looks like? I'm sitting down at my desk going, man, I got to order my next quarter's supply of stuff. How do I know what I need to order? And how do I relay that to whoever's placing that physical order?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, good question, Liz. And I guess on the equipment side, I'll just hop there real quick. All the reports that I showed, and I apologize for not pointing this out, all the reports can be exported into Excel or PDF. So if you have someone that you need to provide the reports to for your budgeting or planning, you can certainly just export that information or print it. So that's, in terms of getting information out of the system, it's really simple to do that. And for most of these, higher dollar items, I'd say we typically see those being budgeted once a year. So once a year, you could come in and pull out all the items that you need to be replacing, so you have those documented. On the inventory side, this is a little bit different, right? Because these are consumable supplies that are turning over quicker. So if you needed to pull a report of just the items that were low right now that you needed to reorder from like your EMS vendor, you could just pull the below min par report. And this would show you across the agency all the items that are low. And typically what you would do is you would filter this down to just your central supply, right? So anything that's low at central supply are the ones that we need to reorder from our vendor. So that would be kind of the report that you would, send over to your administrator to reorder from your EMS vendor, like McKesson or Boundtree or whoever it might be.